Hello and welcome to the first episode of Hell to Pay, where we explore the spiritual motivations behind crime and conflict. I'm Elle.
And this is Aamer.
And I'm Sipho.
In this episode, we'll take you into the multi-billion-dollar scandal haunting the corridors of the Vatican, where sex, money, and lies are destroying the church from within. We'll begin the story in 2014 when burglars entered the Vatican in the middle of the night in a daring raid. Think of Watergate, but competent. The burglars systematically went through offices of a lot of the senior figures in the Vatican. They had welding tools and they went through all of the safes in each office, taking like a couple of hundred to €1,000 in each safe. Not the kind of money that, if you think of the kind of professional guys that can get into, one of the most important buildings in the world and, have welding devices and all of that, not the kind of fee that they would probably normally look for or command. The one interesting thing that they also busted into was in the basement, where there's huge cabinet files of archives, dating back thousands of years. They entered a very specific cabinet and took a pile of documents relating to historical and present financial dealings in the Vatican. When this finally came out in the open in the media, it revealed what everyone knew had been happening behind closed doors for about 3 years. And in the end, it's what brought down Pope Benedict. It's been now almost a decade since the break-in, more than a decade. No one's been charged, but 10 people have recently been convicted of financial crimes and related affairs. The most high-profile of those is Cardinal Becciu. He's the former chief of staff to Popes Benedict and Francis, and at one stage was thought to be a future pope. Just before Christmas in 2023, he was convicted of embezzlement and money laundering and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Becciu's case centred on investment in a building in ritzy London suburb of Chelsea, which our friend Aamer here might be able to speak to.
Yeah.
Moral question here. Would it be worse to be if your football club is owned by the Catholic Church, a Russian oligarch, or a Gulf state? What's morally the worst? I would argue Gulf state is the worst, but Russian oligarch is the least worst.
I guess it depends what your criteria is, because it's a hell of a podium. And it's like, Abramovich is like, maybe the nastiest. Oh, no, probably not. It's hard to be more nasty than NBA.
Of the three hypotheticals, criminal, yes, but least likely to be a pedophile also. Just
No comment.
I'm just saying,
the private activities of the Russian powerful and...
If you had young children and you needed a babysitter, you'd definitely pick
Abramovich over the Emiratis and or the Catholic Church.
Fair. I guess at the time, obviously, like Abramovich was the biggest crook in Chelsea. But yeah, it looks like he had some competition right then. So basically, Becciu and this an external financial advisor who we'll meet a bit more later on invested in this very fancy building in the middle of Chelsea. And, he was tried for misappropriation of funds. There was even apparently some funds that were set aside to free a kidnapped Colombian nun in Mali. And those funds were mysteriously spent on luxury holidays and Louis Vuitton handbags.
Wow.
Becciu's was a really, really powerful figure in the Vatican for a very long time and arguably still is. The case also brought to light his relationship with a younger woman called Cecilia Marogna, who's known in Italy as the Cardinal's woman. She's 33 years younger than him and has received over $500,000 for consultancy work. Basically, there's a grift on, shall we say, that was the center of a lot of this stuff on the office when they're trying to find out if someone should be declared a saint or not. And they had all these external consultants. There were two big ones. She was one of them. And when they did, all the investigation work and things like that into the miracles as to whether someone was going to be declared to have 2 miracles and be able to become a saint. She was doing a lot of that consultancy work, all very off the books, all, money going through different companies. And she was also the recipient of several delightful overnight stays in the Cardinal's Rome apartment, which she even tweeted about, just saying, what a great time was had by all. But she's known as the Cardinal's woman,
People
but she says
tweeting their crimes.
Cecilia Margot. I want to see if she's a 10 or a 9. Or what are we doing? What are we working with here?
Yeah.
What are we working with here?
I mean, she's probably in early 40s, so I don't know if she's MILF territory yet, but you might be in.
She's a Cardinal's beau, so
you know, he's cooking.
yeah,
He's
exactly.
cooking. Let the man cook. He's cooking.
Anyway, she says that they didn't have any affair.
Crimes is my favorite genre of content.
It's glorious, yeah. That's the one thing about crimes is people that do them love talking about them.
Oh, yeah. It's not even a social media thing, because like even before social media, you had people who would write in their diary, like, "Dear diary, today I committed a crime," and then like a list of all the information.
I you know, same wavelength right there.
Yeah. A friend of mine has a thing, because you know in the US they always like whenever they frame like, you know, animal rights activists or like even far right kind of guys who tried to kidnap the Michigan governor during COVID for her lockdowns. And it's like the dude who is always encouraging your group to do the crime is absolutely the undercover FBI guy, like without fail. So it's like if you ever want to weed out an informant, just sit around for a while and see who's like the most gung-ho to do the crime, and that's your guy.
Actually, someone said that during the a post, was it George Floyd, just like, and then into COVID, those protests, right? Someone actually, there was this back and forth on Twitter going like, you know, people getting super paranoid about police infiltrators and informants. Like, don't say this, don't say that. And then someone just responded and went, look, guys, we're going to organize a protest. It's going to be around this issue. You know, we're going to do the proper thing. No one is going to go out there shooting and killing. And, you know, we, the organizers, are not organizing looting. So if a cop wants to sit here and help us print out pamphlets, he's more than welcome to do so. And I was like, brilliant. That's it. If you're not a drug organization, there's no fucking problem.
Yeah, there's no better punishment for being an undercover cop than to have to sit in on like small left-wing organizing meetings and just see that, you know,
sessions.
What is it like that, you know, there's 4 people in the meeting and there wind up being 6 different factions.
Excellent.
Anyway, so yeah, back to the story. Think of a competent version of Watergate, but with sex, dead bodies, billions upon billions of missing dollars, and perpetrators who we might kindly say, you know, are probably more of the professional Italian variety. Okay, so to tell the whole story, we go back to 2005 when Pope Benedict is elected. The then Cardinal Ratzinger was German, and he came of age in Nazi Germany. He was famously a member of the Hitler Youth, like everyone had to be back then. He was conscripted in the Nazi army, but he defected and he became a priest in 1951. He was a really deep and serious intellectual dude. He was also fairly liberal until 1968. Like a lot of people, you know, it kind of sorted out the wheat from the chaff politically, you know, with all the riots in Paris, and also the coming to fruition of Vatican II, which was the movement to give laity more power within the Catholic Church, to democratize it, you know, get rid of Latin Mass, all that kind of stuff. He was always a pretty, I think, theologically quite conservative, but his politics and his theology became even more conservative after that. So Ratzinger was known as God's Rottweiler. He was John Paul's second in charge, and the two of them had a real common cause because they were both pretty hardcore Cold Warriors. Obviously, they, you know, had grown up in Central and Eastern Europe, which explained a lot of that, but also it certainly very much aligned with their politics and the politics of the time, you know, when everyone was paranoid about godless Reds, you know, coming to kill off religion. The one thing that the two of them conspired to do very effectively was to kill off liberation theology in South America. I actually do agree with them that it was essentially Marxism in cloth. You know, people try to say, oh, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like that, but it kind of was. I mean, they would just say pejoratively that it was.
Yeah, it was, but we consider it a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, most of the look, it was always a fairly fringe movement. I think it was sort of given a bit more prominence than because it was an academic movement. There were some very good dudes involved in it, but it was really a very small intellectual movement and never really had a lot of purchase with sort of ordinary people. But they certainly made sure it was killed off. They made sure that the priests were dismissed or were silenced, which is literally when you're not allowed to say anything for a year. And to this day, I mean, there's still a lot of bitterness and recrimination in the church about everything that happened there. But it's also thought that because they were such hardcore cold warriors, both politically and within the church, that their cultural concerns really saw them lose oversight of the church, of good governance, of finance, of all those sorts of things. A lot of people like Betju built up power centers in the church during that time. And that is really kind of the genesis of a lot of the issues that we're going to see in this scandal. So in 2006, after he'd been appointed Pope, Benedict appointed Tarcisio, I don't think I said that right, Bertone, as Secretary of State. So basically the number 2 within the Vatican. And he's a controversial Italian cardinal. And it was even controversial at the time because he didn't have any governing experience. And he was really just another culture warrior. Bertone was also a pretty colourful guy, I think you'd say. When Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, to my mind, one of the worst books ever written, came out,
You're gonna love this. One of my buddies here, his dad is an English teacher at high school, or was, he retired. But every year he used to take Dan Brown's novel, tear a page each day and like correct it and put it on the bulletin board for his students to see why this book is like one of the worst ever written.
Oh man, I remember reading the opening page and just the sheer amount of like italics and bold and just like all the tricks and flicks of the keyboard that was on the first page. I just frisbeed it across the room.
It is such a dumb guy's idea of a smart book, smart like person novel, you know? It's so funny, it's so cool.
Yeah, I think it came out like in the kind of maybe just like around the time of New Atheism when it was really getting going. So I think it was a bit of a like, you worship a god in the sky. Yeah. Like how stupid are these guys?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's like it kind of has all the liver spots of
it's like
everything that came out around then.
Harry Potter coming out just as the fantasy genre hits mainstream, just as it stops being like a nerd's pursuit. That's the only reason why we have to hear from that lady forever, apparently.
And so, yeah, the church very wisely just said, we're never going to talk about it. We're never going to dignify it. And Bertone couldn't help himself. And he sort of broke, the church effectively had no merta, that just no one's allowed to talk about it. And he broke that and, started saying some silly things about Da Vinci Code. He once also suggested that the Vatican should have a professional, preferably a Serie A football team, because the Brazilian seminary students would form a magnificent squad.
Brazilian, Argentinian.
Genius, actually.
Yeah. You
would make Serie C, Serie B easily.
I mean, Brazil's like everyone sort of thinks Brazil's like, yeah, they're all like Ronaldo, R9 and Neymar and stuff like that. They can produce some nerds.
Yeah. People think that every South African can sing. And I'm like, or dance.
No, I do think there are certain like racial subgroupings with they genetically yearn for the football. You put a football in front of them and it's like epigenetic memories of like Pele flood into their brain. And
I imagine like all of because I know quite famously like most of the priests in Brazil are all white, so they're just all going to be like the poor Sicilians with a bit of a conscience. They come from that stock, and they're going to be the kind of weedy Italians who just kind of, wound up on the, cutting sugarcane or something and weren't cut for it. Well, they brought in all the Italians to try and like breed out the slaves.
Yeah.
Brazil.
No, Brazil and Argentina were very purposeful about that. Fuck me. That stuff's so creepy.
Okay, so we got Da Vinci Code, we got forming a professional football team, and obviously, unsurprisingly perhaps, he believes that homosexuality is the root cause of child abuse. So, you weed out the homosexuals, the child abuse is gone, Vatican's great. Anyway, and then in 2007, Benedict also made an appointment of an archbishop, Carlo Maria Viagno, and he was appointed to clean up corruption in the Vatican. So people knew that there'd been, problems going on for a long time. I mean, I think that there's definitely a prequel we can do in this about the God's Banker scandal that ended in Roberto Calvi hanging from Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1982. But yeah, this was getting to be such a problem that there were serious financial issues that were plaguing the Vatican. And so Benedict said, right, we'll get a good guy in to clean up the corruption. Everything's humming along nicely. In January 2012, an Italian television program broadcast explosive documents about corruption and power struggles in the Vatican, which became known as VatiLeaks. Only a few months earlier, Bertone, who featured prominently in the VatiLeaks papers, had orchestrated the transfer of Carlo Maria Viagano, who was the archbishop appointed to look into corruption. So they basically he demoted him to be the Vatican's diplomat in Washington, D.C., So reading between the lines, it sounded like Bertone knew that something was coming down the line and he was trying to get rid of, the guy who was in charge of it. Bertone also outmaneuvered Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, who was the former head of the Vatican's internal bank. He was fired, and Pope Benedict only found out by seeing the news on television. That's how much power Bertone had, and he's said to have wept when he saw what had happened. Tedeschi, incidentally, was never charged with any wrongdoing. He was investigated, but I think kind of everyone was, and he's always said to have felt deeply betrayed by what happened to him. In May 2012, Pope Benedict's butler, Paolo Gabriele, is arrested and charged with having stolen and leaked the papal correspondence behind VatiLeaks to the Italian journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi.
The second best journalist named Nuzzi, as
I was waiting for someone to jump in. He did not sleep with his.
Just got that.
He doesn't want it hard enough. He's not hustling. He's not putting his A-list effort in there.
So yeah, Nuzzi's done a lot of excellent work. A lot of the source material that I'm using here is from, he's written a couple of books on VatiLeaks, and he's the guy. And a lot of the book that covers some of the stuff I'm talking about today is Merchants in the Temple. It's a really cracking read, really well translated. Shortly after he was arrested, Gabriele was convicted, sentenced to 18 months in prison. A lot of people within the Vatican were starting to call that a show trial. It's like, back to the Watergate analogy. They basically tried and convicted Deep Throat while all of the, all the burglars, all of the, all the people involved in the dodgy stuff were still walking free. And obviously, a lot of people took that as a warning not to do this stuff. And then in December 2012, so after Gabrielle's been arrested and put in jail, was actually wound up being sent to house arrest, 3 cardinals went to Benedict and gave him a dossier and, basically saying it is way worse than this. He did the right thing in trying to make this public. And the documents included, the extent of the holes in the finances of the Vatican. So they had a pension scheme, and one of the, somewhat amusing problems with the pension scheme, typically those things, are quite precisely calculated, for the average of how long people live and things like that. Catholics tend to live a lot longer. I mean, they're just wealthy, well looked after guys who just kind of mooch around in their cloth and read books, have a bit of red wine, Mediterranean diet. So, I mean, just the fact that they were living 5 to 10 years longer than expected was causing the pension scheme problems. But they were also it was just, there were so many holes in it because everyone was clipping the ticket. Everyone's, got their own little fiefdom. Everyone's siphoning off money.
Yeah.
The whole, there was a real risk that the Vatican was going to go bankrupt. It was that bad. And so this dossier is given.
Out of interest, sorry, how much are they, what's the size in billions, I guess, of dollars, trillions?
They don't even know. That's the thing. The auditing and the record keeping and stuff has been so bad. No one exactly knows. And at one point during some later subsequent investigations into corruption and stuff, I mean, they found 14 different HR officers because there was so much nepotism and cronyism going on that everyone was just funneling their guys through to jobs. But they actually they don't even know what other paintings are worth because, I guess they're priceless. They don't know that they have all these buildings that were empty because no one knew who owns what. The whole thing is just a mess.
Oh my God.
I mean, the irony that we'll get to later.
So the Pope is not, my view of the Pope as being the CEO of this pyramid, the tip of it, he's almost like a ceremonial head. I guess.
Well, I mean,
and it's the church, it's the College of Cardinals that the most powerful, that's where the sort of wheeling and dealing and operating happens.
Yeah, well, it's so the popes appoint cardinals, and cardinals elect popes. So
Yeah,
there's obviously like a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes. I mean, there's only been I think 3 non-Italian popes, or at least
right.
non-European
Yeah,
popes. And I mean, these are often guys who, it's a political, it's a theological appointment. They're often just not good administrators.
yeah.
And normally, there's someone that might have a heart or a mind for administration, or might have also happened to have studied accounting or something when they did their theology degree in the cardinalship, that will often take charge of these things. But often there's so much self-interest, there are so many power centers, there are so many power struggles that often begin over, theological questions or something like that wind up becoming deep rifts and divisions. There's a lot of geographical stuff. There's so much like just like pure politics basically that's going on in the Curia, which is like the translation is the court of the Vatican. It really is like a sort of medieval European monarchy, but with a lot of the organs of sort of a modern liberal democratic state. So there's a central bank, there's a just kind of general bank, that handles pension funds and things like that.
There's the 300-year, 400-year tender to the Swiss God, however long that's been.
Exactly. We'll see later on there's like kind of a police force and kind of a court system, but it's never really been tested. It's never really had to function properly. And these like last 10 years of scandals have just kind of pulled a lot of band-aids off, and a lot of scabs have come with it. The 3 cardinals take Benedict this dossier, and it's really, really damning. So much so that the day that Benedict receives this and reads it, he decides he's going to resign. But he doesn't tell anyone for a couple of months, I think to, sort of get affairs in order. So people pack away the documents into a nice vault under the Vatican where, everything is safe and secure, and and everything's going to be absolutely fine. Benedict officially announces his retirement on the 10th of February 2013. Shortly after his resignation, there starts being all these media reports about a gay lobby within the Vatican, which, you're meant to read between the lines that, was he going to be outing a heap of gay cardinals that everyone knew existed? Did they band together and bring him down? It's pretty clear now, and I think he's even more or less said so himself, that he was so ashamed that of the level of corruption and malfeasance and just complete dysfunction of the Vatican finances and governance is why he resigned. But there was a lot of stuff put out there to, I think punch a few old enemies on the nose on the way out. And so all these reports about a gay lobby surface. And even I think his memoirs came out in like 2016. And he sort of tries to hint in those as well about the gay lobby and that they brought him down. But certainly, as a bit of a digression, there certainly was a group, or is potentially still a group, of cardinals who have a real fondness for luxury and partying, and whose nicknames include Jessica, Mother Superior, the Peacock, and Monica Lewinsky.
Right.
I wonder what that one is known
Whoa!
for. If you're gonna be in the halls of power, I kind of respect you more if you're like a druggy, luxurious pervert than if you're just like, a glass-eyed psychopath.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. Be like a louche, like eunuch, a court eunuch.
All right. So in Newsy's book, he says that later on Pope Francis investigated the so-called gay lobby and didn't find one, but rather found, a well-known group of closeted Vatican figures with a lot of influence and money. And obviously, when everyone knows that you're, in the closet, that makes you incredibly easy to blackmail.
Yeah.
And, there's an interesting history. Years ago, one of the cardinals who was, part of the gay lobby, his young lover jumped off a building in Rome, devastated by the blackmail that had been brought on his lover. Wink, wink.
Good
And
Lord.
there's, many such cases have been happening over the years. But that's kind of a bit of a digression from the actual scandal at hand here. So in March 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio is elected as Pope Francis. So he's the Argentinian Pope, the first Pope from the developing world, and also someone who had a real reputation for being clean, on the understanding that he would, reform and clean up the Holy See, and also for being, a fairly competent administrator. So basically, somehow they picked like the guy who was probably best to do the job. Of course, Francis, picked the name Francis from Francis of Assisi. He's like really big on helping the poor. In recent years, he's even come out and said Jesus was a communist and I am too, and then kind of realized what he'd said, and then was sort of like, in a certain economic sense, it doesn't stray far from the Gospels. Like I think it's pretty accurate. If you sort of read the true text of the Gospels, that's more or less right. But obviously that he's always been widely suspected of communism by enemies within the church, and people on the right of the church really, really hate him.
Which is weird because wasn't he part of that the Argentinian junta in terms of helping sort of silence the liberation theologists during the dictatorship?
Yeah, look, I don't know that much about his time in Argentina. I think you kind of had to, to keep yourself out of a helicopter, you had to, at least I suppose break bread with the junta. I mean, the whole Catholic Church is tainted, and there were certainly priests and bishops and probably cardinals who were, deeply involved. And I mean, at one point, the Argentinian Catholic Church had like invested something insane, like an insane amount of money in weapons manufacturing for the junta. Like the Catholic fucking church is buying bombs.
Just making crusader armor for the junta.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, anyone who was around then is probably tainted by it. He's always certainly been, he's a Jesuit, but he's very much on the left. He's never hidden his, economic sympathies, has a pretty strong commitment of just going, guys, we have to bring the church back to looking after the poor. But he was certainly put forward as a guy, with a clean set of hands and a good reputation, whatever you thought of his politics and theology. So he knew what his first job was, which is fixing up the corruption, which is addressing the, just the holes that in the finances that might make the whole thing go bankrupt. So a month after his appointment, he appointed a cardinal to clean up the curia. So it's the court, with all its factions and corruptions and intrigue going on. And he also appointed a commission into the Vatican Bank, which is the Institute for Works and Religion, or known as the IOR. Works is like, Protestants are like really big on salvation. Protestants say faith alone will save us. Catholics sort of say that you've got to have that salvation, but you have to do the works and the deeds as well. So you got to do the stuff with the poor. The famous quote from St. James that faith without works is dead. So the Catholic Church still places a lot of store in doing this good work. And the Institute for Works of Religion, the Vatican Bank as it was known, is basically this huge global fund with donations that come in from not-for-profits and just from lay church people all around the world, to do works in developing countries, to help people after natural disasters, those sorts of things. But also, I think it's pretty easy to piece together from understanding the story so far that this had sort of become this giant slush fund. Shortly after he's made these two appointments, he's just barely got in the seat. Outside auditors wrote to Pope Francis to warn him about, just how bad things were. A lot of the reports and stuff from these outsider guys weren't getting through to the top dogs because they were being intercepted by vested interests and things like that along the way. So they wrote him a really concise kind of report about all the irregularities, all the financial problems. And a few days later, he got all the cardinals together to crack heads. He said, we're going to, delivered a really blistering speech about the financial state, about how bad things were, the corruption, the cronyism, the fraud, the money laundering, and said, this is it. It has to stop. We're going to do something about it now. The big issue was Peter's Pence. It's the Vatican Fund for the global poor that's made up from donations, and it's all administered by this Vatican Bank, the IOR. The initial report from the outside auditors found that 58% of the funds donated in 2012 alone, so about $50 million was used for maintenance of the Curia, so the Vatican court. And most of that was just filling up black holes in its finances. So basically there was so much corruption going on. There were these 14 different human resources offices where everyone was just hiring friends and family to do work. There was a tremendous amount of money just going out to all these investigators that I mentioned earlier who were looking into claims of sainthood. And the Catholic Church, especially from John Paul II onwards, has been being flooded with requests to make people saints. And they can sort of keep making more and more people saints because it's good for business. You've got, people want to see and believe in miracles. But I've been to Medjugorje in Croatia. or is it Bosnia or Croatia? I can't remember. And it's sort of right on the border there. And it's this town where this kids apparently saw Virgin Mary. And it is like, it's a really sort of rural, poor Balkans area. You know, there's no, you know, no pavements and stuff, some dirt roads going in. And you get there and it's like the roads are gold plated. You know, everything is brand new. There is so much money that floods into this town from the pilgrims. So these things, you know, there's a lot of vested interest in getting like your local saint, you know, a local person who did well made into a saint. If you're like a cardinal or a bishop that comes from one of these areas, it makes you look good. It also, you know, spiritually is like rewarding, saying that, yeah, you guys are doing the right thing out there. And then also it just provides like tremendous amount of money and employment to often really poor parts of the world.
Oh, you have just explained to me in real terms the whole saints thing. Look, it's one thing to say to me, Saint Francis of Assisi, you know, whoever, you know, like guys who from the medieval era. I never understood why they were still doing this into the 20th and 21st century. Like, we have cell phones now. I always thought that anyone who's ever seen an ATM has no business talking about saints, but you finally explained what the hell the underlying actual political economy of it is. Brilliant.
I don't know. I think it's kind of funny, whimsical, little. I mean, aside like the economy thing, I never thought of before. That's a really interesting way of, you know, understanding it. But I've always thought like it's a nice little thing to like, you know, it's kind of like Times Person of the Year or like the Ballon d'Or.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
Like, this guy did well. Applaud. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like he might not have deserved it this year, but it's like their time, you know. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, it's like when the World Cup's awarded, it's like, you know, we can't give it to another rich European nation, right? Like South Africa, Brazil, like we got to give it to one of you guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, because of these, and I mean, I've really simplified like the sainthood process. There's like beatification. There's
it is quite involved.
Commission where the term devil's advocate comes from, where you've got to, you know, argue for and against. They have all these, you know, supposedly independent outside investigators who are supposed to look into these claims as well as people from inside. And this is where Betchew's lady friend came in earlier. She was one of those.
Yes.
And, you know, they were, you know, she and others were just printing money on the back of this Saints Commission process, which was like, they weren't even invoicing properly for stuff. It was just, I need like 40 grand to go investigate this. And that's what was happening. The rot was just so incredibly deep. It's kind of remarkable that it was, you know, was just allowed to happen and go on for so long. So 58% of funds, so around $50 million, was used for maintenance of the Curia, so filling in a lot of black holes in its finances. Again, because things were just used as slush funds, there wasn't any oversight into how money was used. So all in all, the report found that only 20 cents in the dollar in this fund for the global poor and needy was actually going to projects to help them. And just as an example, so the Curia were living like kings. They either paid no or like peppercorn rents for these huge, gorgeous apartments in the heart of Rome. So some of them were talking about like 500 square meters, fully furnished. You get a nun as like a secretary, a servant.
Yeah.
You know, some of them had several nuns working for them. One prominent, influential Curia member found out that his neighboring elderly priest, who was just kind of an old guy in retirement, had gone into hospital. And so this Curia member knocks down the wall between their two apartments and just took some of his rooms for himself to expand his apartment even further. You know, just thought like no one would know or no one would care. The person who did care was the elderly priest when he returned home and just had like half an apartment. And not only that, but all of his stuff had been put in boxes.
Jesus.
You snooze, you lose. That's what they say.
Right. It's like, yeah, last rites, Vatican style. And then another reporter actually found this same official had $200,000 worth of works at his apartment paid for by a children's hospital.
Okay. That makes sense. Or is it literally just he diverted the funds?
I'm not sure exactly of what happened, but the actual payment came from the children's hospital to his like contractor of choice, who I think he might have had some involvement with, but it's just like It is so like comically evil. It's kind of hard to imagine how like this happens. Can the bald child please personally sign the check for me?
Imagine trying to explain this to Martin Luther.
Yeah.
He would spiral. He would spiral so hard.
He would be such a fucking Redditor. God.
Yeah, well,
He'd be on Twitter. He would be dropping like threads on Twitter. Yeah.
He would be on Twitter now. Because have you read his other work, the one that's less famous? Upon the Jews and their evil, or something like that. So yeah, he would have been on Twitter.
Just like breakfast reading.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of a meme that used to be that he was the original poster.
Yes.
And just get into needless online disputes and just like would not let them go. I'll give you another slice of, again, just how they just had no idea about like how many apartments they have, who's living in them, who's in charge of it. There was another priest who realized that the apartment above him was vacant and had been vacant for some time. So he cut a hole in the roof and inserted a spiral staircase at his own expense, mind you. You know, the kids in chemo didn't pay for that one. But yeah, so he like doubled the size of his apartment just by cutting a hole in the roof. So it's like proper Looney Tunes stuff. So jumping to August 2013, the extent of the rot's really starting to be realized. So 400 bank accounts get frozen, which throws things into chaos because these are a lot of cardinals and stuff that are used to just having unlimited money. There's sort of team of serious Vatican guys who want to clean things up and external auditors, you know, put together, you know, requests for informations for a mass audit. And in October, the deadline passed and a lot of cardinals and people in the church just flat out refused to cooperate. They were just like, nope, or fine, you know, we'll have a meeting, you know, it'll be 5 minutes. And I mean, of course, the great irony is that like Francis, who is, you know, as close as you get to kind of a socialist in the Catholic Church, he like had to hire all these McKinsey guys and stuff to come in to like, you know, if you're going to take on evil, you've got to take on evil like with the most evil guys you can find.
So the only thing that stops a bad guy with a consultant is a good guy with a consultant.
Exactly. Early 2014, Francis appoints Cardinal George Pell as Secretary of the Economy. So he created this new position and he basically put him on par with the Secretary of State, which is usually like the number 2 job in the Vatican. Pell was sort of during this time known as the number 3 in the Vatican. So Pell's like a really imposing figure. He's Australian, which is how I sort of know about him quite well. He's a big guy with a big, deep, booming voice. He's very smart, very intellectual, very serious, and deeply, deeply conservative. So just as a funny aside, a friend of mine years ago had a little trip to the seminary for a while when he was, you know, trying to figure his life out. And he wound up with some Ukrainian, sort of like interning, I guess, with a Ukrainian priest in the Australian Catholic Church because they're allowed to marry and stuff. And I went to visit him one day and this priest told me how he'd been at a conference in Europe of all these, you know, priests and cardinals, whatever. And he was standing around talking to some Polish priests and bishops, because obviously Ukrainians and Polish Catholic Church have a fair bit to do with each other. And he sees Pell, and Pell kind of bounds over and says g'day and all of that. And then Pell turns to these Polish priests and starts speaking to them in High German. And after a while, this...
you to say something absurd like that. Like he's trying to figure out a new slur to invent for
And needless to say, like after a while, this Australian priest is like, I was just chatting with him in English, you know, they can speak English to that. And Pell turns around to him and I won't do my Pell voice, and just always says, Poles always respect a bit of German.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I love brushing off the Pell anecdote whenever I get the chance.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that is Pell in a nutshell. You know, he was also like always disputing climate change. He was really good friends with former Conservative Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, the guy who ate the onion like an apple.
Yep, that's freak.
But on a like serious note, he was also credibly accused of covering up allegations of sexual assault against priests while he was Archbishop of Melbourne. He subsequently apologized, but then also like really vigorously defended the cases in court when, you know, sort of the done thing now is to give people, you know, restitution and to help them, you know, get on with their lives and everything. So right when he was being appointed to help clean up the Vatican, and for all of his many, many failings that we'll find out more about shortly, shortly, as a human being, like there's no evidence he was corrupt. Like he was genuinely wanted to clean up the church. Like I said, he was a very serious dude, and he was thought to be, a good man for that job. The only thing was that at the same time that he was appointed to clean up the church economy, he was also called into the Australian Government Royal Commission into Institutional Sexual Abuse. So he started giving evidence like a few weeks after he was appointed as the Vatican's number 3. He was later, continued giving evidence by video link from the Vatican. At one point, he used an analogy about a trucking company, saying that, quote, if a truck driver picks up some lady and molests her, end quote, he doesn't think it's appropriate for the trucking company to be held responsible because, it's contrary to policy and the ownership didn't agree to this and it's the values of the company.
So priests are truckers, got it, okay.
Yeah, the priests are what, contractors basically?
Just try to get to heaven like with all the cargo as quickly as possible. So while all of this is happening, so Pell's just been appointed, he's been quizzed back in Australia. A couple of weeks later is when the burglars enter the Vatican. So as I mentioned at the start, they, went through all these safes and, they're picking out a couple of €100 at a time. Not the kind of thing that professional burglars are really into.
I was about to ask you, like, this is all very movie-like. It seems very neat, very convenient, shall we say.
Yes, I know. And they haven't made a movie out of it, which is just startling. And they, force entry into one particular filing cabinet underground that they, and we're talking thousands of years of files here, and they targeted one to take out secret files that related to financial misconduct. So one of the missing files that was in this bunch that they took related to the refurbishment of the apartment of the head of the Vatican gendarme, who then wound up leading the investigation into the break-in. That's kind of by the by, because during the investigation, for which no one's ever been charged, by the way, into the break-in, a whole lot of theories began emerging. This is out in, this is big news in the Italian press. A lot of journalists were looking into it. So, there's kind of Hollywood theories about, welding in from below, the from the catacombs, underneath the Vatican, of how they got in and everything. A lot of people were looking into this. And I mean, Newsy, the journalist that I mentioned earlier, he concluded, like a lot of other people, that, perhaps the most plausible theory is the most obvious, that someone just gave him a set of keys. Considering there was like no marks of break-in, there was no, no evidence of like forced entry or anything like that. So given they knew exactly what they were looking for, it seems fairly obvious that it was an extremely inside job. By then, Pell was speaking publicly, as was Francis, about the ongoing investigation. And Pell very much understood it as a warning to those who were investigating the financial misdemeanors, crimes. A few days later, a handwritten note arrived at the Vatican office in London, and it had the words of Anonymous, the hacking group, on it, which said, "We do not forgive, we do not forget. Wait for us."
It's nice to know that criminals also have "so I read it" affect.
Yeah.
Like the Catholic Church, it is incredible how American cultural hegemony. I always talk about this, how cultural, it just bleeds everywhere. Like even the most corrupt, rotten, institute, like the Vatican, is like, we're gonna talk in like Joss Whedon blurbs now. It's humiliating, man. It's so fucking humiliating.
Absolutely. I mean, there's never been any proof that actually came from the burglars. It could have just been some muckrakers, but
someone taking the piss, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, as we'll continue to see, there was a lot of signs and wonders, so to speak, that came along with this burglary. So Easter's a few weeks later. Everything's, ticking along spiritually as usual. And then a series of the stolen papers were returned to the Vatican by the burglars. And these papers related to Michele Sindona, who was the former mafia banker embroiled in the Vatican's original financial scandal that I mentioned earlier in the 1970s. His protege was known as God's banker, Roberto Calvi, who was the guy who was found hanged on Blackfriars Bridge in 1982. And that was eventually, I think, two different independent commissions ruled that it was a murder and not a suicide. Sindona was convicted. He was sort of a mafia banker who had all these crossovers into the Vatican. He was convicted in 1986, and shortly after his conviction, when he was in jail, he also died in mysterious circumstances, having drunk coffee that was laced with cyanide. So Pell and the others involved in the cleanup of the corruption scandal very much understood this, that the papers had been returned relating to Sedona as sending a message. This is what happens to people who squeal, people who get too involved in this stuff. While corruption investigations are ongoing, while the burglaries are happening, starting in 2014, the Vatican invested $200 million for a 45% stake in a former Harrods warehouse in Chelsea, ritzy part of London, with a plan to turn it into luxury apartments. This was all set up by an external Vatican financial advisor, a man called Raffaele Mincioni. Like all good international financiers, he's highly litigious, so I will start using allegedly a lot in the extremely unlikely event that he ever listens. He really likes running to London courts whenever he's hurt. And suing people. So he's sort of, he's always suing a newspaper or organization, anyone that said he's done anything wrong. So he bought the property through a fund in 2012 for about $165 million. So yeah, you got to remember, just a couple of years later, he was selling a 45% stake in that for $200 million. So he was allegedly a close associate of Cardinal Becciu, who we mentioned earlier. And Becciu was accused by sources in the economy ministry. Pell seemed to sing like a canary. He's dead now, so I can say that. So he was always leaking stuff out, and him and Becciu absolutely hated each other. So we can be pretty confident the leak came from him. So he was sort of started, telling the press about how all the dodgy things that Becciu was allegedly doing, disguising the loans on Vatican balance sheets, doing all sorts of accounting trickery that had already been banned. Becciu and Mincioni also allegedly at the same time were trying to get another investment of about $200 million going into Angolan oil, the notoriously scrupulous industry, to invest in some new pipeline. So back in the Vatican, in 2015, hidden microphones are discovered in offices, cars, and homes of a lot of senior figures. Only it was later discovered that not all of the microphones worked. They were very clearly dummies, and it was very apparent to anyone who sort of opened them up and looked at them. So much like the return of the papers, it was interpreted by Pell and others in the Vatican that this was a message to any potential collaborators in the anti-corruption and reform effort.
Italians love wildly symbolic messages, like, fish in a bullet vest, fucking Mike in
horse's head.
Yeah. They love doing that shit. They're very theatrical peoples.
They are. So yeah, the message is very clearly no secrets are safe, and perhaps Mr. Pell, you have some secrets we know about. Perhaps other people have other secrets we know about. All the while, the Vatican keeps pumping money into this fucking property in Chelsea that was like very clearly a white elephant from the start. They just kept throwing good money after bad. All in all, the payments to brokers, all the debts that they accrued from loans and things like that meant that the total investment in this property was $360 million. And to just show like the wild inflation and clipping the ticket that went on, it was eventually sold to Bain Capital, I believe is Mitt Romney's old firm, in 2022 for $223 million. So all this is going on. Pell is working with Francis and trying to clean up the Vatican. Then he's charged in Australia in 2017 with historical child sexual abuse. It's a really, really long and deep and complicated and sad and serious issue, so I won't go too much into it. In December 2018, he was convicted of 5 counts of child sexual abuse against 2 boys, and he was sentenced to 6 years in jail. He served 404 days in an Australian jail before he was acquitted in April 2020 by Australia's highest court. Needless to say, this was like a huge culture war issue in Australia, and there's so much going on that, yeah, that's a whole other story. But by then, Becciu and Pell, I mean, they'd been at war for years, but they were just out in the open, absolutely hated each other. Some in the Vatican on the reform side had accused Becciu of orchestrating the charges against Pell. There's sort of a mysterious huge chunk of money that went missing, about $750,000 that people say was used to, bribe people into giving evidence against Pell. Like, I think there's no real foundation to that. The Australian trials were all fairly above board, and, a lot of very serious complainants, multiple, credible. So I don't think that flies, but that is still, including Nuzi, I think has a bit of sympathy for that point of view. but certainly reformists in the Vatican do see a bit of a conspiracy going on there, which kind of sucks, but that's the Vatican for you. So a lot of heat's on Becciu, and for whatever reason, Pope Francis just won't give him the bullet. So he names him as special delegate to the Knights of Malta. He even appoints him as cardinal in 2018. And this is the guy who's sort of the center, the heartbeat of corruption in the Vatican, while Francis is personally really committed to trying to reform it. Also in 2018, there was a testimony from Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò. So I don't know if you remember him from early on, but he was the first guy who was appointed by Benedict to look into corruption in the church. And he was outmaneuvered and sent as the Vatican's diplomat to the US to try and get rid of him before his first report that led to Benedict's resignation. So Viganò accused Francis of shielding and enabling a really well-known horrible serial abuser, this American cardinal called Theodore Ted McCarrick, because he released him from restrictions on his activities and travel as a member of the Catholic Church, even while these, really serious allegations were against him. So Francis, for all of his fairly decent politics and real, I think, genuine commitment to cleaning up the church, just seemed to have this incredible blind spot when it came to punishing dodgy dudes and cracking down on guys, with these really serious child sex abuse allegations against them.
Many such cases. Many such cases.
So that's kind of most of the story. So we'll just do a quick wrap up because we've met a lot of characters and just to see where things have happened and exactly where it is today. So in 2020, Francis finally requested Becciu's resignation, although he let him keep the title of cardinal. And Becciu has since been convicted for the financial mismanagement and money laundering, along with 9 other people. But all of them have appeals that are underway as we speak. Also in 2020, Benedict's butler, Paolo Gabriel, who sort of blew the whole thing open with the original Vati leaks, died after a long illness. In 2022, Benedict died as well, reportedly, to the end of his life, clearly harboring a lot of good old-fashioned Catholic guilt about what had happened to his butler and always, checking in on the well-being of his family. Then in 2022, damning synonymous memo was circulated about Francis in the Vatican, really mostly about sort of his leadership and on theological questions, really just going him for being left, for, softness on LGBT issues, letting divorced people get communion, those sorts of things. In 2023, Pell dies, and he's outed after his death as author of the memo, which is kind of bizarre because the two of them reportedly got on really well and he liked Francis a lot personally. And they were the two driving forces behind the reforms. They were genuine, seemed like genuinely good guys in terms of the, cleaning up the place. They had, good intentions. They believed in what they were doing. They believed it was right. And they worked really well together. But Pell was just such a hardcore conservative to his bones that he just completely rat fucks him. Just writing this memo, just basically saying conservatives have to get a hold of this, conservatives have to get the chair after him. And it was, it was pretty nasty. And it was sort of widely suspected during Pell's life in the last year or two when this memo was circulating that it was him. But he was outed after he died as having come from him. So then also in 2023, Cardinal Becciu is convicted of embezzlement and money laundering, sentenced to 5 years in prison. Raffaele Miniccioni is also convicted of embezzlement. So he's the guy who set up the whole Chelsea property deal. Last year, he sued the Vatican in an English court, of course, in an attempt to clear his name. And then finally, last year as well, Viganò was found guilty of schism in the Vatican and excommunicated. So the guy...
Can I just say that I really enjoy it? Schism is a crime. We need to bring that back. We need to call people heretics. We need to have trials for heresy.
I'm genuinely surprised. That's still a thing.
Just in the prison yard.
Sting them that badly?
Imagine you're just out in the prison yard, doing weights. It's what are you in for? Schism.
Schismatics.
I nailed my thesis to the walls of the fucking the doors of the church.
The Vatican prison gangs are different types of schismatics. So Cathars, Albigensians, various peasant movements, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's the Jesuits run the kitchen. If you want to shank someone, you got to go see a Jesuit.
Oh yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
So yeah, I mean, the lesson here after, like, I know it's confusing because there are so many names and so many allegations and things like that. So if you think of all of the allegations, all of the investigations, all the different people we've met, only Paolo Gabriel, the butler who kicked things off by, very bravely being the whistleblower with these documents. He's the only person that spent time in jail for this. And that
My
was 2 months in a
God.
holding cell before he was convicted and he was placed under house arrest. And, they made sure that he had a comfortable life until the end. So yeah,
I mean,
in
the
total,
literal fall guy, as in, we'll take care of you. Just shut the
yeah,
fuck up and it'll be fine.
absolutely. Yeah.
And it was
So
fine.
yeah, not a single person has spent a day in jail for all of this. And it's been going for 10 years.
Yeah, not surprising. I'll be talking in my episode about something similar where a lot of dirty threads, but one guy ends up in jail, like one fall guy, a local,
Some
someone's,
poor
yeah.
schmuck. Some pencil
Yeah.
pusher. Many such cases, as we're going to say,
Many such
over and over. I have one question, and then
Yeah,
we
go
can
for
just talk through that, and then so is it just so basically? I guess I'm asking a jurisdiction question because at the moment it sounds like a lot of it, aside from the burglary and then what it discovers and etc., is that I'm trying to ask a jurisdiction question basically. Like, is this with the Italian government or is this purely like the Vatican saying no, this is just our thing?
It operates like as I said before, like a medieval royal court, and they've just overlaid these like 20th century institutions onto it. But
Right,
they
yeah.
kind of can't really work, and I don't think anyone especially wants them to work. But yeah, it's just like completely stuck. The whole thing is just like, it's inertia and vested interests. The only reform that has happened in the Vatican since the start of the scandals, from under Benedict and through to Francis, has been France's reform of the Vatican Communication Office. It's like the liberal dream of like, if we can just get our messaging right, we'll solve this.
This is when libs love to talk about campaign financing laws, and it's like, buddy, that's not how power works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to means test the billionaires. That's what we're going to do.
And I don't think Francis is going to be around for so much longer.
Yeah.
Although his kind of big move is like appointing a new round of cardinals and how much he's going to make them, political appointments. So, people of his way of thinking to kind of clean out the old guys. So yeah, there's just so much intrigue going on. And like I mentioned, it just blows my mind that this isn't like a bigger story. Because it's genuinely, I think, fascinating.
No, it absolutely is. It's very. We were joking about the Borgias earlier, but it's a return to the true nature, in spite of the fact that evidently or supposedly we have a woke pope now. The only reason, really, that he is even there is because it's what the Catholic Church has always been, which is this like hilariously corrupt, like it's a medieval government, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's this institution that accounts only to itself. And when you think about the pedophilia scandals, for example, and all the rest of that, how secular courts had to drive that, how secular courts had to basically. You were talking about Cardinal Pell earlier, his attitude versus the way that the church deals with these issues now. It was the secular courts that put them in that position. I love dirty popes. They're so spectacular and awesome. Yeah, that was fun. That was awesome.
It was.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Cheers, guys. Thank you for listening to Hell to Pay. Please subscribe, like, share, tell your friends, and stay tuned for more.